David had asked this same question. The Gemara says that there is no kedushin between a Jew and a non-Jew. The marriage is not effective. Yet the only way to violate the prohibition of intermarriage is through marriage. Sexual intercourse in itself is not marriage, may be only a rabbinic prohibition. So what specific action is forbidden? So this was David's question. It was asked 9 years, 6 months ago, and was modified 8 years and 2 months ago, and liked 1,000 times. So here's one answer. The Gemara concerning non-Jewish women made a clear difference between two kinds of man-woman relationships, marital or non-marital. Marital relationship is a natural reality which was anterior to Matan Torah and is not a Jewish particularity. In other words, you don't have to be Jewish to get married. When Gentiles marry each other, that is marriage too. The Jews have a specific way of becoming married, but it's not, marriage is not considered exclusive to Jews. So the Rambam writes, before the Torah was given, when a man would meet a woman in the marketplace and he and she decided to marry, he would bring her home, conduct relations in private, and thus make her a wife. Before the Torah given, he also says in Halacha 4, before the Torah was given, when a man and woman would meet in the marketplace and he and she desired, he could give her payment, engage in relations such as with her, whatever they desired, and then depart. Such a woman is referred to as a harlot. So, in other words, before the Torah was given, they could decide, is this going to be marriage or is it not going to be marriage? There's a natural delineation between marital and non-marital behavior. For the intermarriage, the Rambam stated, when a Jew engages in relations with a woman from other nations, taking her as his wife, or a Jewess engages in relation with a non-Jew as his wife, they are punished by lashes according to scriptural law. As it states, you shall not intermarry with them, do not give your daughter to his son, and do not take his daughter for your son. This prohibition applies equally to individuals from the 7 Canaanite nations and all other Gentiles. This was explicitly stated in Ezra, actually the book of Nehemiah, that we will not give our daughters to the Gentiles in the land, and we will not take their daughters for our sons. The scriptural prohibition applies only to marital relations. The Shulchan Aruch ruled as the Rambam. So what he seems to be suggesting is that even though halachically the status of marriage is not successful, in other words, according to Jewish law, they are not considered husband and wife. The notion of relations for the purpose of marriage always existed. In other words, the way you are violating this is very legalistic, but the act that you're doing is an act that in most cases would lead to marriage. If you do that act with the intent of it leading to marriage, it is a violation of the Torah, even though the end result will not be successful. In other words, the end result being that you are legally recognized as married, that is not successful. But the fact that you engaged in this act for the purpose of marriage, that that still is considered a forbidden act. So the question would be, is there anything else like that where the act itself does not succeed as far as legal status is concerned, but it's still considered an important act, and the act itself is a violation. But that's what they're saying. The act always was, and in most cases still is, an act that would cause marriage. So the act that you're doing, which would regularly cause marriage, is forbidden, even though the end legal status is yeah. Again, this second answer here, to summarize, it is not halachic marriage, which, as you noted, cannot exist to a non-Jew, which is biblically forbidden, nor is it intercourse alone, but rather the intercourse in the manner of wedding and marriage. That is the prohibition, is to have intercourse in the social framework of a marital relationship, even though technically there is no marriage. Yeah, so it ends up being a kind of, it might be something like what the Rambam holds for magic. In other words, when somebody performs magic with the intent to convince others that they have supernatural powers, that is a forbidden act, even though according to the Rambam, there are no supernatural powers that somebody could have. So in fact, the person didn't engage with supernatural power. This is according to the Rambam, not according to others. But according to the Rambam, this person is acting as if something is happening and presenting it as if it's happening, even though it's not really happening. This magician is in no way conjuring superpowers. He's not in communication with other forces of the universe. He is simply performing an illusion. But since he's performing the illusion with the intent to convince others that he has these supernatural powers or is in contact with these supernatural powers, that itself is a violation of witchcraft. I think that might be a close comparison here. They're acting as if they're married. Their sexual relationship is for the purpose of marriage or within the confines of marriage in their minds, even though it doesn't really have the effect. They are the act itself is forbidden. It would have to be something like that. That's what I'm assuming is what we're talking about. So that's what I'm going to suggest for as far as our research so far.
So, Rabbi, this seems to be a difficult subject to me. Would you say that the synopsis of this is you can't intermarry, and that you would help me here?
I would say, like, if for instance, let's say we're talking about a Jewish woman who's married to a Gentile husband. So let's say the husband wanted access to her property. Let's say she died. Now, according to Jewish law, a husband inherits his wife. So let's say this husband went to let's say they had children. So it's the husband versus, let's say they had one son. So it's the husband versus the son, and they go before a Jewish court. Now, the husband wants to argue that as a husband, he should inherit his wife. The son is arguing that the husband has no standing because he's not Jewish, and therefore their marriage is not a legal marriage. So this law would support that. In other words, this law is that it's forbidden to intermarry, but that other rule, which is that the marriage doesn't have legal standing, that would be an example where it would show up. He's arguing that he's the husband and therefore he has a right to inherit his wife. But if that marriage is in fact not of legal standing, he's not her husband, and therefore he has no standing to claim that he has a right to her property. Anything that is the special right of a husband with a wife would not apply to him, because the marriage is not considered to be a legally binding marriage. So anytime it would come up in court, that's for the most part the ramification of that other law, that the kedushin is not a kedushin, is that he doesn't have legal standing as her husband. There's other laws that kick in, which is that technically he doesn't have legal standing as the parents of the children either.
If the people are already married, have already intermarried, not you talking about people who are going to, but people who already are, do they get lashes?
So the Jew would get lashes. The Gentile, there isn't a prohibition for a Gentile to marry a Jew. There's a prohibition for a Jew to marry a Gentile.
All right, so the Jew gets the lashes. I mean, that seems a lot of people that are intermarried would get lashes.
Well, there's a lot of things like that. We assume that nowadays it seems to be, based on my readings, not based on a real study of this, but just based on my readings over the years. It seems like in present day times, we rely on a notion that if Judaism was presented properly with real role models, influential role models, and it was explained properly and it was lived properly, that the Jews who are intermarrying or are doing all these other things would have never done that. And so we live at a time when it seems like people don't know, we would call it people don't know better. In the past, we've used this term tinok shenishba, like a child who's kidnapped at youth and never really got a chance to understand the true meaning of the Torah. So they're not considered responsible for not following it. So our generation is typically spoken of as a generation like that if people had the proper role models and got a chance to study Torah deeply, in a positive way, they would never violate the Torah, or at least not violate it knowingly and willingly. So that's what we tend to rely on, because there's all sorts of prohibitions in the Torah that those same people would be violating, like Shabbos and Yom Kippur and Pesach and things like that, which have very severe penalties associated with it. But for the most part, we say that you can't expect, in the best of times, it would never look like this. And therefore, we can't judge people based on those punishments in our generation. But if we had been in a generation where people had a chance to know better and did know better and still were doing it, then those punishments would apply.
Rabbi, would it be incumbent upon this woman to have her son circumcised? Would she, I mean,
If the woman, I've been to circumcisions in those cases, and mohels do them all the time.
mhm.
So whether it's the woman's responsibility, or it's the community's responsibility, because technically, it's the responsibility of the person to be circumcised, but obviously, as a child, they're not in a position to do it. So when a parent is circumcised, overseeing the circumcision or doing the circumcision, they're doing it really on behalf of the child. So, if there's no father, then the mother would be responsible. If the mother's not doing it, then the community could be responsible. And eventually the child themselves becomes responsible. It was one of the miracles of the return of Russians to Israel, or people from the former Soviet Union to Israel, one of the absolute miracles. And it was when all manner of people spoke of it as witnessing a miracle, was seeing the lines of Russian men who were waiting to get circumcision, even though they really had no other religious activity. They weren't connected to Jewish religion in any other way. They still felt that they must have a circumcision, and adult circumcision is a big decision for somebody to make, and the numbers were staggering of people that did it. It's one of the really big miracles of the past several decades. There's something about it that is so deeply ingrained in the Jewish core, and again, at some point, it was the men themselves that are deciding to do it, because ultimately, as an adult, it falls on you to be circumcised. But the adults in your life when you're young are the ones who take on the role. So it falls first on the father. If the father's not there, it would fall on the mother. And then if the mother's not doing it, it would fall on the community to do it. A few decades ago, intermarriage was considered like the last of the laws of the Torah that a person would still be held responsible for the decision. 100 years ago, it might have still been Shabbos observance. Like 100 years ago, if somebody violated Shabbos, that would be considered a violation that they knew better. They knew better, and they did it anyways, and therefore they should continue to be held responsible, even in a generation that is losing appreciation for the severity of other mitzvahs. And so when somebody stopped keeping Shabbos, they were treated as a pariah by their family. I think I told you about this. I interviewed my grandfather when I was 13, which is 50 years ago. It was around Pesach time, and I interviewed my grandfather because he had all these great stories, and we wanted to get him on tape. And my father sat in with me during part of it and asked a few questions of his own. And he somehow triggered a memory in my grandfather. And my grandfather remembered when he was a kid. So if he's remembering when he was a kid, it had to happen around 1910, 1911, something like that. He would hang out when his father, so this is my great-grandfather, would gather with his friends on Saturday night for Malava Malka. He was a Hasidic guy who came from Belarus together with other Hasidic guys to Denver. I think they said there were like 40 families that moved to Denver area from their town or near their town. And so the men would get together on Saturday night for Malava Malka. So he remembers this man, one of the nights, his name was like Mr. Firestein or something. He remembers him asking a question to the group. He said, "Who changes who? Do parents change their children or impact their children, or do children impact their parents and change their parents?" And the example he gave was, he said, if you would have told me when my children were young, if you would have told me that one of them was going to be Machal Shabbos, I would have told you that if they're Machal Shabbos, I would write them off. He said, now my kids drive on Shabbos to my house and I give them a hug. So who changed who? So like during that time, if somebody was, or let's say, I don't know, 20 years before then, he's testifying he would have written his children off if they were Machal Shabbos. There was a time like that if children made the decision to be Machal Shabbos. My grandfather told us that he was like one of 10. And out of those 10, maybe two or three stayed religious out of his brothers and sisters. And he said that if you asked me, why did we stop being Shomer Shabbos? He said, I can't even tell you. It wasn't like it was a philosophical moment or like some kind of theological decision. We just stopped. It just happened. So, something happened, let's say around that time, that shifted it when it came to Shabbos. But before then, if somebody was Machal Shabbos, this was very common. They would write them off. And certainly if they intermarried, they would write them off. And so at some point, Shabbos stopped being that kind of a thing, but intermarriage continued. And I remember people talking about intermarriage that way, certainly into the 60s, and even into the early 70s. I still remember people talking about intermarriage that way, that if somebody made a decision to intermarry, they know better, and they still decided to do it, and therefore the proper thing is to write them off, to sit shiva for them, and that's the end of it. That is certainly not the way you're counseled to act nowadays. In the vast majority of cases that I've encountered, the advice, even from what would be considered the greatest halachic authorities, is to not write the person off nowadays. So even that has shifted, I would say. And now I don't know if there's anything. I know people reached out to people that have become idolaters, who embraced Hinduism and did not write them off just because they, embraced Hinduism, or and similar to people who converted to Christianity, that you don't hear. Again, there might be some circles that I'm not, hanging out with, where the person has been, where the parents said shiva for them, but you just don't hear it about anything
What about
more.
adultery? What about adultery?
Right. Again, I mean, the there are halachic complications in a halachic marriage, if it is known that the wife committed adultery. It is halachically forbidden for them to stay married. But and if somebody committed adultery with a married woman, then it is considered, a terrible offense. But I also don't know of situations where somebody was told that they, that you have to sit shiva for them, and that you can't have any contact with them. It could be that a community would decide to sort of excommunicate someone if they felt they were like a serial kind of person in that situation. But I know of one situation in particular where the it was a terrible blow to the community, but again, and obviously there was terrible consequences to the family because of it, but there wasn't a edict that the people involved are banished. They obviously, you have the regular ramifications of friends feeling betrayed and things like that, but there wasn't an edict that they be banished because of it. So I don't know of anything that that is considered that kind of last bastion anymore. Again, these are considered very wrong. They're very wrong. But is it crossing a line that we would consider the same kind of line if they knew better? So it doesn't seem like that at least the community is treating it that way. That and that the assumption is if people knew better, they wouldn't do it. That it doesn't let somebody off the hook personally for that they've done something terribly wrong. It just means that as far as our expectations for them, we don't treat them like we would in a time when there was a Sanhedrin and there were rabbinic courts. They wouldn't, get those punishments now. I don't know. There was an attempt to resurrect the Sanhedrin like a decade ago. If they had fully become a Sanhedrin, I doubt that they would have been able to exercise any kind of punishments. They would have become like a court to decide all manner of law, but I don't think they would have been able to carry out punishment until Mashiach comes. Let's say Mashiach comes, and when Mashiach, of course, Mashiach's coming, but when Mashiach comes and there's a Sanhedrin, and they are able to do punishments, that's going to be a conundrum. How to start that up again, because you're going to need to feel confident that people are knowledgeable and are doing it anyways. So that'll be one of the challenges of Mashiach era. But one of the things you could say is that the fact that those punishments are on the books continues to make it clear that these are terrible acts and they have terrible consequences. And even if the punishments are not going to be done today, those punishments are on the book because that's how serious they are. Even when you speak to secular Jewish leadership, assimilation and intermarriage are at the top of the list of the threats to Jewish continuity. And so as a people, it remains a terrible catastrophe. But again, those individuals don't necessarily understand the degree to which it's a catastrophe, but it is. It continues to be, a terrible catastrophe whenever it happens.
If somebody doesn't really care, let's say, you have a intermarriage and the Jew and the thing just doesn't care. What happens if they have children? What are the children considered?
So if the mother is Jewish, then the children are considered Jewish. If the mother isn't Jewish, the children are not considered Jewish.
Right.
That's the, that is the halachic bottom line.
But let's say that the mother is Jewish and the father, let's say even the father, they don't care. Let's say they don't care about religion. Do they?
Right, but not caring, that's one of the sort of interesting things about Judaism, which is that it is both genetically, it's both biologically transmitted and is at the same time a faith commitment. Yeah. So it's there's some people that are biologically Jewish and they are entirely Jewish. Even if somebody doesn't have a circumcision, they are 100% Jewish, and it doesn't change because they have Jewish practice or not, their status of being Jewish. And there's other people that are not biologically Jewish but consider themselves Jewish, and that's been a real challenge in the last few decades, especially in America. But we don't have a tradition that credits that. In other words, the tradition is that you need the biological Jewishness in order for Jewish practice to make you a Jew, or to be a Jewish practice. There is a phrase, I don't think it started with Jews, but there's a phrase that even if you don't believe in God, God believes in you. So your decision about your status is not ultimately God's choice about your status. So, yeah, but it is one of the curiosities of Judaism. All right. I am very grateful that we had this chance to learn together. Again, we're doing the Rambam's negative commandment that you're not supposed to intermarry. And I'm very grateful that we got a chance to learn together. And I look forward to learning together tomorrow.
We thank you.
All right. Be well, guys.
Thank you.
All right. Be well. My stuff sharing.